Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to talk about the 8 books that I finished reading in May. I will also talk about my participation in the Medieval-A-Thon as well as the Asian Readathon and which books counted for which prompts. So if you're interested in that, just stay tuned. So the first book I finished in May was Jade Legacy by Fonda, the third book in the Greenbone saga, and I gave that one 4.5 stars. For me it was the perfect conclusion to this trilogy. It is an urban fantasy centering around Asian characters in a fantasy world that is very unusual because it has definitely like, not that kind of like medieval feeling. It's much more modern, and the like magical feature in this world is Jade, which can give the users, if they're experienced, a lot of powers. And I love this trilogy. It's a lot about family, but also, very political and I just really enjoyed it, and I thought this was the perfect conclusion. So I didn't count this book towards anything because I was almost done with it when the month started, but fantastic read. I did a whole reading vlog for this series because it was honestly a lot, and if you have read the books, you should definitely go and see it. Then the next book I finished was Ace by Angela Chen. This is a non-fiction book about asexuality, what that is, and how sexuality plays into our modern world, how sex is something that you can find everywhere, but also how our romantic relationships are always connected to sex, and how that doesn't have to be the case. And this book tackles a lot of things, and it is a little bit all over the place in some aspects, but I really enjoyed it as a resource. I think that it definitely holds value to a lot of readers. You don't have to identify as asexual to get something out of this book. I think it's interesting to anyone and everyone, so I would definitely recommend. I gave this one 4.5 stars because I thought it was a little bit all over the place and didn't have a specific target group that you could see this being written for. And I also wanted to say that in my reading vlog, I said that after reading this book, I concluded that I was not asexual, but I think that I have to redact that a little bit because after finishing this, it's now Pride Month, and I actually found a new term that is not in this book, and that is phrasexual. And I was actually quite sad that it didn't come up in this. I don't know if it's too new a concept. I haven't really looked into it, but that's basically what I was kind of looking for in this book, and which is not covered. So if you don't know, phrasexual is basically the opposite end of the scale to demisexual. So basically you experience sexual attraction to strangers, but not to people you're very familiar with. And I was kind of sad that this was not in the book, and I was asking myself why that is. So I read this one for the first book of Medieval-A-Thon to get out of prison, and for the Asian Readathon I read it for the prompt highly rated book by an Asian author because this has really high ratings, and deservedly so. Then the next book I finished was Mathilde by Leonhard. I read this one for the Asian Readathon prompt, a book that you're unsure about, and this is a book I knew absolutely nothing about. I found it in a little free library and decided to pick it up because I did like the optics of it. It looks really old, and it is printed in the GDR, which doesn't exist anymore, so that was kind of intriguing. But I didn't know nothing about the book, and in the end I decided to give this 3.5 stars, I think. This is a book that kind of reminded me of A Farewell to Arms by Hemingway, but it is written by a German author who had to flee Germany during the Second World War because of his political views. He was a pacifist, so he was against the war, and he was also a left-wing person. Still, if you read this book, it's kind of uncomfortable. This was written in the 40s, and the male gaze on the main character Mathilde is a lot at the beginning. The sexualization of a small child is really not that great. On the other hand, this had a very nostalgic feeling for me at the beginning because it follows the small girl growing up in a very rural place in Switzerland. And I think that the way the nature was incorporated and stuff like that, it definitely gave me that nostalgic feeling of growing up in this kind of area of Europe. So I did enjoy that. And then as Mathilde grows older, we have a lot of her like marriage troubles that we follow. I wasn't really a fan of how meandering the tale is in that regard, but in the end she marries a guy who is like her true love, and he is British. So when the war actually starts, this is all set before the Second World War, but when the Second World War starts, her husband decides to go to Britain and to join the forces to fight against the Germans, and she stays behind in Switzerland. And then we kind of get this like dual perspective. So we follow the husband during the war, where the author incorporated a lot of his own experiences of fleeing from Germany. And we also get the perspective of Mathilde, who experiences extreme stress and fear for her loved one. And yeah, it was interesting. I think in some regards I did like the topic a little bit more than in A Farewell to Arms, but on the other hand, that is only like the last bit of the book. So a lot of it is just meandering through Mathilde's life. And yeah, as I said, the male gaze in some of these aspects wasn't that great. So not a book I hated, but not a book I loved. It was just fine, I guess. Then the next book I finished was another audiobook, and that was Love Marriage by Monica Ali. I really enjoyed this book. I read this for the Medieval-A-Thon prompt of the last book I bought, because I had just gotten it at the beginning of the month. And for the Asian Readathon, I read it for just the first prompt book written by an Asian author, and I really enjoyed this book. This one follows a couple who wants to get married. The woman in this couple has Indian parents, and the man in this couple has a feminist mother, and he's struggling with some mental health issues. And we meet this couple on basically mostly the main character, the woman of this couple, on the night where their parents meet for the first time. And then we kind of follow them as they try to set a date for the wedding and try to plan the wedding. But basically nothing goes according to plan. And I really enjoyed this book. It was quite messy, but in a great way. You definitely see that the main character has, I think Yasmin was her name, she has this this big plan for her life, and she's like sure she's on the right path, but then things happen and she starts to doubt things, and things start falling apart, and she is trying to hold stuff together that maybe just doesn't hold together anymore. And I really enjoyed this. This book really deals with a lot of topics, and some of them might be a little bit random. There's also a lot of content warnings for this book, so I would recommend checking them out, especially when it comes to having a sick child. I think that might be very triggering if you have experiences with that. And I really didn't see that coming in this book, so I just wanted to mention it. But yeah, there is a lot of harder topics dealt with here. Also big content warning for rape, and that also comes to play quite late in the book. But I think, yeah, it's important to mention that. But there was a lot to love about this book. I really enjoyed the main character. I really enjoyed all the very complex dynamics between the characters. And I enjoyed some of the discussions about, you know, expectations and what we learn to expect from the world, and maybe how the world really is and stuff like that. So yeah, overall, really loved it. I gave it 4.5 stars as well. Then I finished Empire of Sand by Tasha Suri. This one counted for the Medieval-A-Thon prompt to read the first book in a series, and with the Asian Readathon I read it for the prompt to read a book by an Asian author in a universe you want to experience. Now this is a desert fantasy, and yeah, I love desert fantasies. I love the desert. I think it's such an interesting landscape, and yeah, I don't know, I just love it, so I'm sorry. So this was a book I was really intrigued by, and I was hoping that I would absolutely love it. In the end, I did really enjoy it. I think that because I was quite stressed during the time, it dragged out a little bit too much over my life, so I might have enjoyed it more if I could have read it quicker, but unfortunately that was not possible. In the end, I gave it 4 stars, and as I said, I really liked it. This is a book that follows a girl called Mare. She is kind of mixed race, so her father is from the, kind of like dominating race, the kind of dominating race in this empire, and he's in a very high political position. He's governor of this like region where they live, and Mare's mother was from a race that is slowly but surely pushed out. A lot of these people have disappeared, and we find out what happened to them during the book, and they are just like highly targeted and slowly extinguished in this empire. And so Mare is in a very difficult position because she is perceived as a noble woman because of her father, but also as a kind of inferior race because of her mother. But actually the people of her mother do have magic, and Mare has inherited that magic. And she's trying to look out for her smaller sister, but then things happen and she's basically forced to marry someone she has never met, and they're both forced into this marriage, and she has to leave her father's palace where she grew up very like sheltered, and has to start this new life. And this deals with very interesting religious beliefs. I really enjoyed how the religion and the political aspects in this book were combined. I wouldn't say that it is like super well explained, like a couple of questions are still in my mind about it, but I did enjoy that. I also really like that the magic in this book is kind of channeled through dancing, so a bodily practice that kind of reminded me of yoga in a way. And this is like like an exercise, but with a lot of spirituality within it as well, and like a lot of the culture of this of this people who are like driven out of this empire. So I really enjoyed this. I did find the romance in this to be okay. The 2 people who have to marry, even though they don't know each other, actually do have feelings for each other throughout the book, or they develop those feelings. So if you're into that, I think that this might be an interesting book as well. I'm not a big romance reader, so I just found it to be okay. There is some quite gruesome scenes in this book, especially one character is, how do you call that? Executed, probably, which was very hard to read. So yeah, it's not all fluffy desert fantasy. There is a lot at stake here as well. But overall, I really enjoyed it. I think it's a good book, solid. This was the debut of the author, so I can't wait to read her newer books now. Then the next book I finished was The Color of Magic by Terry Pratchett. This was for the Medieval-A-Thon prompt to read a book with foiling on the cover, because the dragon and also down here the flames and stuff are red foiling. This is the first book in the Discworld series, which I had not started before, so this is my first venture into it. Beforehand, I had heard a lot of people say that this is not a great entry point, so I was a bit unsure about it, but honestly, reading stuff out of order makes me uncomfortable, so I wanted to start with the first one, and I don't regret it. I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 stars as well. This is an interesting book because it's not like a novel, like it's not like one big story. It's more like 4 shorter stories following these 2 main characters. We have a wizard who isn't really doing so great at his job, and we have a tourist who has come to this world to experience all the adventures and all the heroes and all of that stuff. And so that is a very interesting way way to enter a fantasy world, because obviously the wizard is very apprehensive. He's like, this world is fucking dangerous and you just wanna like watch it. Like the tourist guy, he wants to see tavern brawls and stuff like that, and the wizard is like, but people die there, that's dangerous. So you have that really fun dynamic. And also they have this chest with legs and it's actually sentient in a way and I love that. I think the chest was my favorite part of the whole book. It was hilarious. So this wasn't a book where I laughed out a ton. The humor in this is quite clever and quite intelligent, and I really enjoyed this. There was one scene where I laughed out loud, and that is when in the beginning of the book it is explained what the Big Bang Theory is in this universe, and I love that. It was so good. Yeah. But I really enjoyed it. You get to see like 4 very different parts of this world. You start out in the kind of capital, big city, and everything is kind of medieval and stuff. And then we also have a world with dragons, but not really. You have to find out. And we have a kind of dangerous, almost like a temple, like it had a little bit of Indiana Jones. It had that kind of Indiana Jones feeling with this old temple, and there's like evil things in there and stuff. And then the last story focuses on the edges of the world, which also was really cool. It also mentioned some pirates, but we didn't get to see them really, so that was a disappointment. But overall, I really enjoyed this first glimpse into the Discworld, and I will definitely pick up the next book soon. Then the next book I finished was my last audiobook for the month, and that was Girl, Serpent, Thorn. I really struggled with that book title throughout my vlog. This is by Melissa Bashardoust, and this is a fantasy story about a girl with a curse. I read this for the Medieval-A-Thon as my like final book to become Empress, and I read it for the Asian Readathon as the book with a character who is a woman and or older, because all the like important characters in this book are women except for one character that I don't want to talk about to spoil nothing here. But basically we have this girl who is cursed and she has a lethal touch, so nobody can touch her. She's hidden away in a palace where basically behind every wall is a secret tunnel system where she can move freely, and she's not really allowed to be in contact with anybody, and her family is traveling around, so they're only in this palace for one season, and all the rest of the year she's pretty much alone in there and left behind. And when the story starts, she realizes that a thief, which is basically a demon in this world, has been caught and is in the dungeon. And she believes that this thief might know how to lift her curse, so she's trying to get to the thief and to learn the secrets to lift her curse. And she gets help from a man called Assad. He saved her brother's life. Her brother is the like ruler, the Shah, I think. Yeah, this man was integrated into kind of like the palace guard, I would say. And so he's helping her get to the thief to find the answers. But everything is not quite as it seems. It's just what I'm saying. I really loved this book. I thought it was very unexpected. It had a very unique plot that I loved following along. It had a lot of surprises that I really liked. It is also sapphic. And yeah, it had quite a few heartbreaking moments as well. It has this overall message of accepting yourself the way you are, and especially this idea that if other people shun you, maybe it's not because of you, maybe it's because of them. So with the lethal touch, obviously, she's not a danger to herself. She's a danger to others, and that's why others avoid her, but that has nothing to do with her. It's not her problem per se. So yeah, I really love this book. I don't want to like spoil anything, but as I said, very unexpected plot. The only thing I would have wished for is a little bit more time with the main couple together, because they only have quite a few scenes together and I wanted more. But other than that, absolutely loved it. It really reminded me of a book called A Curse of Roses, which I read last year and really liked. They have very similar themes, but a little bit of a different mythology in the background, and yeah, just different cultural aspects, because A Curse of Roses deals more with the Catholic Church, and this one is Persian inspired. But I loved Girl, Serpent, Thorn, and I gave it 4.5 stars as well. And now, talking about the last book of this, I read this for the Medieval-A-Thon for prettiest book on your shelves, because like honestly, this book is freaking gorgeous. And I read this for the Asian Readathon as, let me see, also the book with the prettiest cover. So yeah, this is The Book of Tea by Kakuzo Okakura. And this is a book about tea, as it says. I thought this was quite an interesting little short book. It is only like 70 pages. I decided to give this 3 stars. I thought that it was very interesting, and what really intrigued me about this book is that it was written in 1906. So it is over 100 years old, but if you open this cover, you will not feel that. I thought it was still very relevant, especially when it talks about the relationship of the West and the East, and how there's some things that the West will never understand because we're all on our high and mighty horses looking down on all the other people in the world. I really enjoyed that. And then the author basically talks about the art of tea, the art behind tea, tea ceremonies and stuff like that. And I thought it was very interesting because he keeps contrasting it to ideas in the West, like especially when it comes to interior design as well. So yeah, I definitely learned a lot from this little book and it was quite a fun read. I would have wished that, yeah, it would have been a little bit more about tea itself, like a little bit more, but that's not what this book wanted to be. But I think the title is a bit misleading because it is about the ceremonies of tea and the art of tea and not about tea. But yeah, apart from that, I really enjoyed this. I thought it was a fun little read, and as I said, most gorgeous cover. So with that, I finished 7 books for the Medieval-A-Thon and 5 books for the Asian Readathon, and that was my goal, so I was really happy to reach that. It was an amazing reading month, even though I had a lot going on and I wasn't quite sure whether I would make it, but somehow things worked out. I also read a ton of amazing books, like a lot of 4.5 star reads, so that was amazing as well. So I hope that your May reading was great too. Let me know what your favorite book this month was, and I will talk to you soon. Bye!